Sometimes the things we inherit aren't meant to be kept, they're meant to be rebuilt. Quinn Stroud stood before her father's forgotten garage, a crumbling structure everyone said was beyond saving, and saw something no one else could see. At 61, widowed and written off by a town that had long stopped noticing her, Quinn made a choice that seemed foolish to everyone watching. She bought the wreck for pennies. Then she picked up her father's old tools and started building. Alone. What rose from that ruin would change everything, not just for Quinn, but for everyone who thought they knew her story. What was she really building out there in the Montana dirt? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Quinn Stroud had learned long ago that being invisible had its advantages. At 61, she moved through the small Montana town of Shepherds. Bend the way winter fog moved through the valley, present but unremarked upon, there but not quite seen. The limp in her left leg, a souvenir from a logging accident 15 years back, gave her gait a distinctive rhythm that people recognized before they recognized her face. Not that many bothered to look anymore. She lived alone in a modest ranch house, 3 miles outside town, the kind of place that had good bones, but showed its age in the way all honest things do. The roof needed replacing. The fence posts leaned like old men catching their breath. The porch steps creaked a warning with each ascent. But the house was paid for, bought with life insurance money after her husband died, and it was hers. That counted for something. Her mornings followed a pattern worn smooth by repetition. Up at 5:30, coffee black and strong, oatmeal with cinnamon. She'd sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread before her, reading every word, even though most of it didn't concern her directly. The obituaries she read carefully. Too many familiar names appeared there these days, people she'd known her whole life, reduced to a paragraph and a grainy photograph. She wondered sometimes what hers would say. Quinn Stroud, 61, survived by 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. She kept to herself. The town knew her, but only in the way small towns know their quiet members. She was Vernon Weatherby's daughter, the one who'd stayed local. She was the widow of Tom Stroud, who died in a hunting accident 33 years ago, leaving her with 2 little girls and a future that had to be rewritten overnight. She was the woman who'd worked at the county assessor's office for 22 years, processing property deeds and tax records with meticulous accuracy, never missing a day unless one of her daughters was sick. People said she was difficult. That was the word they used, difficult. What they meant was that she didn't smile reflexively, didn't engage in the performative warmth that greased the wheels of small-town social commerce. She said what she meant and expected others to do the same. This made some people uncomfortable, particularly men who weren't used to women who didn't soften their edges for general consumption. Her father, Vernon Weatherby, had been a carpenter of considerable skill, the kind of craftsman who believed in doing things right, even when no one was watching. He'd built houses, barns, custom furniture, whatever people needed. His hands were never still. Quinn remembered watching him work as a child, the way he'd measure twice and cut once, the way he'd run his palm along a piece of wood to feel for imperfections the eye might miss. He'd let her help sometimes, teaching her how to hold a hammer properly, how to read a level, how to respect the tools that made creation possible. In 1978, when Quinn was 14, Vernon had built a garage on a piece of land he owned just outside town. It wasn't for any particular client, he built it for himself, a place to work and store his tools and take on projects that needed more space than his home workshop allowed. He'd spent an entire summer on it, with Quinn as his assistant, and when it was finished, it stood solid and true, every corner square, every beam properly braced. He'd carved his initials into one of the main support beams, and below them, smaller, he'd carved Q. W. for Quinn Weatherby. "So people know we built this together," he'd said. The garage had served him well for 30 years. Then he'd died a heart attack while splitting firewood, sudden and complete, and the garage had sat empty. Quinn, dealing with estate matters and her own grief, had meant to do something with it. Sell it, maybe? Rent it out? But she never got around to it, and after a few years the structure began to fail the way unmaintained things do. The roof developed leaks. The walls weathered and warped. Teenagers broke in and used it for parties, leaving behind beer cans and cigarette butts. Eventually, even they lost interest. By the time the property went on the market, Quinn had never officially inherited it. Some paperwork error had left it in legal limbo until a title company cleared it up. The garage was a ruin. Half the roof had collapsed. The walls leaned precariously. The concrete foundation had cracked from freeze-thaw cycles. The whole structure looked like it might give up entirely with the next strong wind. Quinn had driven past it by accident. She'd taken the long way home from the grocery store, following old roads just to fill the time, and there it was. A for sale sign stuck in the weeds, the garage behind it like a skeleton picked clean. She'd pulled over, engine idling, and stared. The memories came fast and thick. Her father's patient voice, the smell of sawdust and sweat, the satisfaction of a nail driven true. Summers spent learning to build, instead of whatever other teenage girls were doing. She'd been happy then, she realized. Purpose had a way of creating happiness as a byproduct. She'd called the number on the sign. The price was laughable, less than she'd spend on a decent used truck. The land itself was only an acre, landlocked except for an easement. The realtor, a young woman who barely looked old enough to drive, had been honest. It's basically scrap value. The building needs to be demolished. We've had some interest from developers, but the access issues make it complicated. I'll take it, Quinn had said. The realtor had seemed surprised. Don't you want to see it first? I mean, walk the property? I've seen it. The paperwork had taken a week. During that week, Quinn told no one what she was doing. Not her daughters, not her few remaining friends. She wasn't sure yet what she intended. Only that the thought of someone else tearing down what her father had built made something in her chest tighten painfully. Her older daughter, Jamie, lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids. She was a marketing executive, successful and busy, the kind of person who scheduled phone calls with her mother a week in advance. They talked dutifully but without much warmth. Jamie had always been impatient with Quinn's quiet ways, her refusal to perform enthusiasm, her tendency towards solitude. "You should get out more, Mom," Jamie would say. "Join a book club or something. You're too isolated." Her younger daughter, Holly, lived in Denver. She was warmer than her sister, more patient, but she worried. "Are you doing okay, Mom? Really okay?" she'd ask, as if Quinn's contentment with her own company indicated some psychological deficit. Both daughters had their father's easy charm, that ability to move through the world assuming welcome. Quinn had loved Tom Stroud with the fierce, foundational love of youth, but she'd never quite understood how he made people laugh so easily, how he filled rooms with his presence. When he died, a stupid accident, a gun that discharged. While he was climbing over a fence, she'd grieved deeply, but she'd also discovered that she didn't mind silence the way he had. She'd rebuilt her life around quieter rhythms, and if that made her strange in other people's eyes, so be it. The town's hardware store, Shepherd's Supply, occupied a building that had probably been there since Montana achieved statehood. Quinn went there the morning after she closed on the property, needing to assess what tools she'd need. Her father's old tools were still in her garage at home. She'd never been able to get rid of them, but they'd need maintenance, sharpening, perhaps replacement. The owner, Wendell Price, nodded at her from behind the counter. "Morning, Quinn." "Morning. What can I help you with?" She'd considered being evasive, but secrecy seemed pointless. "I bought the old Weatherby garage property. Need to evaluate what's salvageable." Wendell's eyebrows rose. "That old place? Heard it was for sale. You planning to tear it down? Planning to rebuild it?" "Rebuild it." He said it slowly, as if testing the words for sense. "That's quite a project." "It is. You doing the work yourself?" "That's the plan." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating her age, her limp, the scope of what she was proposing. Then he shrugged. "Well, you know where to find me if you need supplies." She'd bought a new tape measure, work gloves, a pry bar, and safety glasses. Walking out, she'd felt the weight of Wendell's skepticism, but also something else, the first stirring of purpose she'd felt in years. The diner, Rita's, served breakfast all day and was the unofficial gathering place for local gossip. Quinn stopped there for lunch, taking a booth by the window. The owner, Dolly Kern, had been serving food in Shepherd's Bend for 40 years, and she'd developed the kind of X-ray vision for human nature that came with that territory. "Heard you bought some property?" Dolly said, refilling. Quinn's coffee, without being asked. Word traveled fast. "The old garage, your daddy's place." "That's right." "What are you going to do with it?" "Fix it up." Dolly's expression was unreadable. "That's a big job for one person." "I've got time." "Time's one thing. Knees and backs are another." But Dolly's tone wasn't unkind, just factual. "Your daddy was a good man. Built half the decent structures in this county." "He was. You helped him on that garage, didn't you? I remember seeing you two out there, summer of '78. "I did." Dolly nodded slowly. "Well then, I expect you know what you're doing." She moved on to another table, and Quinn felt something unexpected, the absence of judgment. Dolly hadn't tried to talk her out of it or question her competence. She'd simply accepted Quinn's statement and moved on. That evening, Quinn sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, making lists. She'd need to assess the structural damage first, determine what could be saved. The foundation, if it was still sound, could be repaired. The framing might be partially salvageable. The roof would need complete replacement. She'd need permits, probably, though for what exactly she wasn't sure yet. She found her father's old blueprint. He'd drawn it himself, every measurement precise, every joint labeled in a box in her garage. The paper had yellowed and bore coffee stains from his thermos, but the lines were still clear. She spread it on the table and studied it, running her finger along the drawings, remembering. The phone rang. "Holly." "Hey, Mom, just checking in." "I'm fine. What did you do today?" Quinn hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding it. "I bought a property. The garage your grandfather built." Silence on the other end. Then, "The one that's falling apart?" "That's the one." "Why would you buy that?" "Because it shouldn't be torn down." "So you're going to what? Hire someone to fix it?" "I'm going to fix it myself." Another silence, longer. "Mom, that's not realistic. You can't rebuild a building by yourself." "Why not?" "Because you're—" Holly caught herself. "Because it's a huge project. You'd need help." "I'll figure it out." Holly's sigh carried clearly through the phone. "Have you told Jamie?" "Not yet. She's going to think you've lost your mind. She's entitled to her opinion." They talked for a few more minutes. Holly trying to find a gentle way to express concern, Quinn deflecting with the ease of long practice. When they hung up, Quinn sat in the quiet house and felt no doubt about what she'd committed to. The opposite, in fact. She felt certain, the way she imagined sailors felt when they finally set course for home. The next morning, she loaded her truck with her father's tools, the ones she'd maintained carefully over the years, oiling the metal, treating the wooden handles, and drove out to the property. The garage stood against the morning sky, like a reproach, like a promise, like a question waiting to be answered. She parked, got out, and stood there with her father's worn leather tool belt in her hands. The belt was cracked and stained, the pockets stretched from years of use. He'd worn it every day, and after he died, she'd found it hanging in his workshop, still holding a few nails and a pencil stub. She'd kept it, unable to throw it away, unable to use it. Until now, she buckled it around her waist. It fit. Then Quinn Stroud, 61 years old, widowed and written off and done apologizing for taking up space, walked into the ruins of her father's garage and got to work. The first day, Quinn simply cleared debris. The floor of the garage was littered with years of accumulated trash, broken glass, rusted beer cans, rotted pieces of roofing material, animal droppings, the detritus of neglect. She worked methodically, wearing thick gloves and sturdy boots, filling garbage bags and loading them into her truck bed. The physical labor felt good. Her body remembered this kind of work, even if it protested more than it once had. She'd brought her late husband's old plaid thermos, dented from decades of use. Tom had carried it to every job site, every hunting trip, every early morning. She filled it with coffee now and set it on the tailgate like a companion, taking breaks to sip from it and survey her progress. The thermos was another thing she'd kept, another talisman of a life that had been interrupted but not erased. By noon, she'd cleared enough floor space to see the foundation properly. The concrete had cracked in several places, but the damage looked superficial, the result of water intrusion and freeze-thaw cycles, not structural failure. This was good news. Foundation work was expensive and technical. Crack repair she could handle herself with the right materials. She was kneeling, examining one of the larger cracks, when she heard a vehicle pull up. She stood, her left knee protesting, and saw a silver Mercedes SUV parked beside her truck. A man got out, dressed too well for a Thursday morning in rural Montana, pressed khakis, a polo shirt, expensive sunglasses. Vaughn Tomridge. Quinn knew him by reputation, though they'd never spoken. He was a developer from Billings who'd been buying up property in the area for the past 5 years, converting old ranches into luxury home developments with names like Aspen Ridge and Meadowbrook Estates. The locals were divided on him. Some saw him as progress, bringing money and growth. Others saw him as a parasite, transforming working land into playgrounds for out-of-state retirees. "Miss Stroud?" He approached with a confident smile, hand extended. She shook it briefly. "That's right. Vaughn Tomridge. I heard you purchased this property. Congratulations." "Thank you. Mind if I ask what your plans are?" She minded very much, but saw no reason to be rude. "I'm going to rebuild the garage." His smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Rebuild it? That's ambitious. This structure looks pretty far gone. The foundations sound." "Even so." He walked a slow circle, hands in his pockets, assessing. "That's a significant investment of time and money. Have you considered that it might make more sense to start fresh? Tear this down? Build new? No. Or," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "you might consider selling. I'd be interested in acquiring the property. I could offer you 3 times what you paid for it." There it was. Quinn set down the pry bar she'd been holding. "It's not for sale. I understand the sentimental value. Your father built this place, didn't he? But sentiment doesn't keep a roof overhead. 3 times your purchase price is a fair offer for land this size." "I'm sure it is, but I'm not selling." Vaughn studied her for a moment, recalculating. "Miss Stroud, I don't think you understand the scope of what you're taking on. Rebuilding a structure this damaged will cost tens of thousands of dollars. The permits alone will be complicated. And frankly, he caught himself. With your work schedule and other obligations, this could drag on for years. Then it drags on for years. I'm trying to help you avoid making a costly mistake. I appreciate your concern." Her tone made clear she didn't. "But my decision's made." His smile finally faded. "Well, if you change your mind, you have my number." He produced a business card from his pocket and set it on the tailgate of her truck, securing it under a stone. "That offer won't last forever." "I expect not." He drove away, and Quinn stood in the wreckage of her father's garage, feeling anger heat her face. The condescension in his voice when he'd mentioned her age, the assumption that she'd be swayed by a quick profit, the implication that she wasn't capable of seeing this through all of it, grated against something raw in her. She picked up his business card, crumpled it, and threw it in one of the garbage bags. The rest of the afternoon, she worked with a kind of fury, pulling down sections of collapsed roofing, salvaging nails from old boards, her hands growing raw inside the gloves. The sun, beat down. Her limp became more pronounced. But she didn't stop until the light began to fail and she'd cleared the entire interior space down to the foundation. Loading her tools back into the truck, she noticed people had been driving by more slowly than normal, craning their necks to watch. The news of her project had spread. She could feel the town's attention settling on her like dust, and she didn't like it. But there was no help for that now. At home that evening, she soaked her hands in warm water and examined the damage. Blisters were forming across her palms. She popped them carefully, applied antibiotic ointment, wrapped them in gauze. Her back ached. Her knee throbbed. She was, as Vaughan had so delicately implied, 61 years old. Her body no longer forgave hard labor the way it once had. But as she sat at her kitchen table, eating leftover soup and studying her father's blueprint, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Excitement, anticipation, the sense that tomorrow would bring work that mattered. The phone rang. Jamie this time. "Holly told me what you're doing." "Did she?" "Mom, this is crazy. You can't rebuild a building by yourself." "So I've been told." "I'm serious. Do you have any idea how much work that is? How much it will cost?" "I have some idea." "And you're doing this, why? Out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to Grandpa?" Quinn set down her spoon carefully. "I'm doing it because I want to." "That's not a reason. It's the only reason that matters." Jamie made a sound of frustration. "You're throwing away money you could be saving for retirement, or helping us with. The kids will need college funds." "Your kids have college funds." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "Jamie?" Silence. Then, "The point is you're too old for this, Mom. You're going to hurt yourself, or waste a bunch of money, or both. And Holly and I will have to pick up the pieces." The words landed like stones. Too old. It was the thing people had been carefully not saying all day, and here it was, spoken plainly by her own daughter. "I appreciate your concern," Quinn said, her voice level. "But I'm capable of making my own decisions." "Clearly not. Jamie, I have to go. The kids need dinner. Just think about what I said, okay?" The line went dead. Quinn sat in the silence of her kitchen and felt the sting of her daughter's judgment. But underneath it, deeper, was something harder. Determination. She'd spent 33 years being careful, being responsible, being the widow who raised her daughters right and never caused trouble. Maybe it was time to be something else. The next morning, she returned to the property. In the clear light of day, with the debris cleared, she could see the full extent of the damage. The western wall leaned outward at a dangerous angle. The roof framing was almost completely unsalvageable. The electrical system, such as it was, would need to be entirely redone. The project was bigger than she'd initially thought. She spent the morning taking measurements, making notes, sketching diagrams. She'd need to shore up the walls before doing anything else. That meant temporary bracing, which meant buying lumber. She made a list, checked her bank balance on her phone, and tried not to think about Jamie's words. Around noon, an old pickup truck pulled up. Quinn tensed, expecting another intrusion, but the driver who got out was someone she recognized, Dolly Kern from the diner. Dolly carried a paper bag and a thermos. "Figured you might be hungry." Quinn wasn't sure what to say. "That's kind of you." "It's a sandwich and some soup, nothing fancy." Dolly handed over the bag and looked around at the garage. "Lord, this is worse than I remembered. It's a project. That's one word for it." Dolly walked the perimeter slowly, taking it all in. Then she turned back to Quinn. "Your daddy would be proud, you know, that you're doing this." Something in Quinn's chest loosened slightly. "You think so?" "I know so. Vernon Weatherby believed in fixing things instead of throwing them away. Looks like you got that from him." Dolly headed back to her truck, then paused. "People are going to talk, Quinn. You know that." "I know. Let them. You just keep working." After Dolly left, Quinn sat on the tailgate and ate the sandwich turkey and Swiss, fresh bread, still warm, and felt less alone than she had in months. The soup was homemade chicken noodle, rich and salty. She savored every bite, then got back to work. That afternoon, she began the real construction. Using temporary braces and careful geometry, she stabilized the western wall. It was slow, technical work, requiring patience and precision. But her hands remembered the motions, and her father's voice echoed in her memory. Measure twice, cut once, trust the math. By the time she quit for the day, the wall stood straight and true, held in place by a framework of 2x4s. It was a small victory, but it was hers. Driving home, she passed through town and noticed people watching her truck. The old Weatherby girl, they'd be saying. Trying to rebuild that wreck all by herself. Give her 2 weeks before she quits. Quinn drove on, her wrapped hands aching on the steering wheel, and smiled. She'd give them something to talk about. Quinn fell into a rhythm. Every morning at dawn, she'd load her truck with tools and supplies, stop at the gas station for coffee, and drive out to the property. She worked until the light failed, or her body demanded rest, whichever came first. The days took on a meditative quality. The repetitive motions of construction, the problem-solving, the gradual transformation of chaos into order. Her father's old job site radio, a battered metal box with an antenna held on by electrical tape, still worked. She'd found it in her garage, tested the batteries, and was surprised when it crackled to life. She kept it tuned to the classic country station, and the music filled the empty space around her. Patsy Cline, George Jones, Willie Nelson, songs from another era, when her father was alive and work meant something you could see and touch. The physical toll accumulated. Her hands, despite the gloves, developed calluses on top of the old ones. Her left knee swelled each night, requiring ice and elevation. New muscles ached in her shoulders and back. But her body was also remembering, adapting, growing stronger in small increments. She was sleeping better than she had in years, the deep sleep of exhaustion rather than the fitful half-sleep of loneliness. By the end of the first week, she'd salvaged everything worth saving: old boards with good wood still in them, hardware that could be reused, the original windows that had somehow survived intact. She'd reinforced the foundation cracks with epoxy and began the slow process of rebuilding the frame. Her father's blueprint guided her, but she made modifications where necessary, adapting to modern building codes and the realities of what materials she could afford. Dolly came by most days around noon, bringing lunch and occasionally staying to watch Quinn work. She didn't offer advice or ask intrusive questions. She just kept Quinn company in a way that felt comfortable. Two women who understood that silence could be its own form of conversation. On the 8th day, Dolly brought news along with lunch. Vaughn Talmridge was at the diner this morning, asking about you. Quinn paused mid-hammer swing. What was he asking? How long you'd owned the property, whether you had family who might want to sell, whether you had the money to finish what you started. Dolly's expression was carefully neutral. I told him to mind his own business, but you should know he's still interested. He made me an offer. I turned it down. That man doesn't hear no very often. Just be careful. That afternoon, Quinn drove to the county office building to inquire about permits. The building smelled like old paperwork and floor wax, familiar from her years working in the assessor's office down the hall. She'd retired 2 years ago, and while she knew some of the staff, the clerks at the planning desk were new faces. The young man behind the counter looked barely old enough to vote. He listened to her explanation of the project, then frowned at his computer screen. You'll need a building permit for sure, possibly electrical and plumbing depending on what you're adding. There's also the question of zoning compliance. It's been zoned commercial since the 70s. Right, but there have been updates to the code. Let me check. He clicked through screens while Quinn waited. Okay, so the good news is you're grandfathered in for the commercial designation. The bad news is, you'll need an engineer's report on the foundation and structural integrity before we can issue the building permit. An engineer's report. It's standard for renovation. Projects of this scope, the county just needs to verify that what you're building won't fall down. Quinn kept her voice even. How much does an engineer's report cost? Depends on the engineer. Probably $1,500 to $3,000. She felt the number like a punch. She'd budgeted for materials, not professional consultations. And I can't get the permit without it? Afraid not. He seemed genuinely apologetic. State law, but I can give you a list of qualified engineers if that helps. She took the list, along with the permit application forms, and drove home feeling the weight of bureaucracy settling on her shoulders. $3,000 she hadn't planned to spend. She'd have to dip into her savings, the money she'd earmarked for emergencies and old age. The irony wasn't lost on her spending her safety net to build something that might never be finished. That evening, she called Holly. Her younger daughter answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom, how's the project going? It's going. Ran into a permitting issue today. What kind of issue? Quinn explained about the engineer's report. Holly listened without interrupting, and when Quinn finished, she said, That's a lot of money. It is. Are you having second thoughts? No. A pause. Then, Jamie called me. She's pretty upset about this whole thing. I know. She thinks you're having some kind of crisis. Quinn sat at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, and looked out at the darkening Montana sky. Maybe I am, but it's my crisis to have. Holly laughed softly. That's fair. Look, I can't say I completely understand why you're doing this, but I trust you. If this is what you need, then I support it. The words settled like balm on a wound. Thank you. Just promise me you'll be careful, and if you need help, financial or otherwise, you'll ask. I promise. After they hung up, Quinn sat in the quiet and felt grateful for Holly's grace, even as Jamie's disapproval weighed on her. Both her daughters loved her, she knew that. But love came in different languages, and Jamie's language had always been practical concern, while Holly's was acceptance. The next morning, she called the first engineer on the list. His fee was $2,500. The second engineer charged $2,000. The third, a woman named Patricia Valdez, quoted $1,500 and said she could come out that afternoon. Patricia arrived in a dusty Subaru, clipboard in hand, wearing work boots and a fleece vest. She was perhaps 50, with grey-streaked hair pulled into a practical ponytail. She walked the property with Quinn, taking measurements, making notes, asking questions about the original. Construction. Your father built this? Patricia asked, examining the foundation. In 1978, he knew what he was doing. This foundation is solid. The cracking is superficial. She moved to the walls, testing the remaining original framing. And this lumber is old growth. You don't find quality like this anymore. So it's salvageable? Absolutely. You'll need to replace the damaged sections and add modern bracing, but the bones are good. Patricia made more notes. I can have the report to you in a week. The county will accept my certification. After Patricia left, Quinn felt lighter. The engineer's fee was manageable, and the validation that her project was viable, that her father had built something worth saving, meant more than she'd expected. She was measuring lumber for the new framing when another vehicle pulled up. This time it was a battered Ford F-150, and the man who climbed out was someone she recognized from her father's era, Griff Ashford, a retired carpenter who'd worked alongside Vernon on various projects over the years. Griff was in his 70s now, lean and weathered like jerky, with calloused hands and sharp eyes. He stood at the edge of the property, looking at what she'd done, and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You're Vernon's girl." "That's right. Heard you were out here trying to put this back together." "Trying." He walked closer, examining her work with a critical eye. He pointed at the wall bracing. "That angle's wrong. You'll want to adjust it before you frame the roof, or you'll have weight distribution issues." Quinn bristled. It's per the original design. Original design didn't account for 40 years of settling. Trust me on this. She wanted to argue, but something in his tone, not condescending, just matter of fact, made her pause. She pulled out her level and rechecked. He was right. The angle was off by 2 degrees. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to cause problems down. The line, "I'll fix it," she said. "Good." Griff headed back to his truck. "Thank you," Quinn called after him. He waved without turning around. "Your old man taught me half of what I know. Least I can do is make sure you don't make rookie mistakes." After he drove away, Quinn adjusted the bracing, grateful and annoyed in equal measure. She was learning that accepting help didn't mean surrendering control, but it was a difficult lesson for someone who'd spent decades being self-sufficient. That night, wrapping ice around her knee and reviewing the day's progress, she thought about the 2 weeks that had passed. She'd cleared the site, stabilized the structure, navigated bureaucracy, and started actual construction. The garage was beginning to look like something that might stand instead of something destined to fall. More importantly, she was still standing too. The engineer's report arrived in 6 days instead of 7. Patricia had been thorough, 12 pages, detailing the foundation integrity, the salvageable structural elements, and her recommendations for the rebuild. Her conclusion was unambiguous. The project was viable and, if executed properly, would result in a structure that met or exceeded current building codes. Quinn took the report to the county office the next morning. The same young clerk processed her application, and within an hour she had her building permit. The paper felt substantial in her hands, official validation that she wasn't just wasting time and money on a foolish dream. With the permit approved, she could work in earnest. She began framing the new sections, following her father's modified blueprint. The work required precision. Each piece had to fit exactly, had to bear weight in the right places, had to connect to the existing structure without compromising its integrity. Her hands remembered the motions from watching her father, and muscle memory guided her when her conscious mind wasn't sure. She found a photograph. In a tin frame at the bottom of one of her father's old toolboxes, Vernon, standing in front of the completed garage in 1978, summer sun bright behind him, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. Quinn propped the photo on her truck's dashboard where she could see it while she worked. Some days it felt like he was watching, making sure she got it right. The physical work was getting easier. Her body had adjusted to the daily labor. The blisters had become calluses. Her knee still ached, but she'd learned to pace herself, to take breaks before the pain became severe. She was stronger now than she'd been a month ago, her arms showing definition that hadn't been there in years. Griff returned 3 days after his first visit. He pulled up just after dawn, opened his truck bed to reveal stacks of lumber, and started unloading. "What's this?" Quinn asked. "Had some extra, 2x6s mostly, good quality, figured you could use them." The lumber was exactly what she needed for the next phase of framing, and it was expensive. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because it's too much." Griff set down the boards he was carrying and looked at her with the patient expression of someone explaining something simple to someone stubborn. "Your father lent me his table saw for 6 months when mine broke and I couldn't afford a new one. He never asked for it back, never charged me. This is me returning the favor, 30 years late." Quinn wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just said, "Thank you. Don't mention it. Now, you're going to need help with this next section." It's a 2-person job. They worked together through the morning, and Quinn was surprised by how comfortable it felt. Griff didn't patronize or oversee, he simply worked alongside her, pointing out potential problems before they became actual ones, offering techniques that made the work easier. By noon, they'd framed an entire wall section that would have taken her 3 days. Alone. He left after lunch, refusing payment. "I'll be back Thursday if you need another hand," he said, and drove off before she could protest. That afternoon, Jamie arrived unannounced. Quinn saw the rental car pull up and felt her shoulders tense. Her older daughter got out wearing expensive jeans and a fitted jacket, sunglasses hiding her expression. She walked to where Quinn was working, picking her way carefully across the construction debris. "So, this is it," Jamie said, looking around. "This is it. It's bigger than I expected. The foundation is 30 by 40. Jamie examined the structure with an appraising eye that reminded Quinn uncomfortably of Vaughan. "Tomridge, how much have you spent so far?" "That's not really your concern, Mom. It is my concern. When you're spending money you should be saving. What if you need assisted living in 10 years? What if you have medical bills?" Quinn set down her hammer. "Jamie, why are you here?" "Because Holly said you were actually going through with this, and I needed to see it for myself." She gestured at the garage. "This is insane. You're 61 years old, rebuilding a structure that's been abandoned for a decade. For what?" "For myself." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." They stood in the Montana sun, mother and daughter, and the gulf between them felt vast. Quinn tried to find words that would bridge it, that would make Jamie understand, but everything she thought to say felt inadequate. "Dad's been dead for 33 years, Jamie said finally. "Grandpa's been gone for 10. This won't bring them back." "I know that." "Then what are you chasing? What do you think this is going to give you?" Quinn looked at the half-finished structure, at the walls rising from her father's foundation, at the work of her own hands. "I'm not trying to bring them back. I'm building something forward." "Forward to what?" "I don't know yet." "This is a waste, Mom. A waste of time and money and energy. You're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to run out of money. And then what? Holly and I will have to bail you out." The words stung because they revealed what Quinn had suspected, that her daughters saw her as a potential burden, a problem waiting to happen. "I've never asked you for anything," she said quietly. "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "The point is, you're being selfish. This affects all of us." Quinn felt anger flare hot and sudden. "How exactly does my rebuilding my father's garage on my own property with my own money affect you?" "Because when you can't finish it, when reality sets in, we'll have to deal with the fallout." "Then don't. I'm not asking for your approval or your help. I'm telling you what I'm doing." Jamie's jaw tightened. "You know what? Fine. Do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to pretend this makes sense." She walked back to her rental car, and Quinn watched her drive away. The encounter left her shaken, angry, and sad in a way that made her chest ache. She and Jamie had never been close, not the way some mothers and daughters were, but this felt like more than their usual distance. It felt like severance. She tried to return to work, but couldn't focus. Finally, she packed up early and drove into town. Without quite meaning to, she ended up at Rita's diner. Dolly took one look at her face and poured coffee without being asked. "Rough day?" "My daughter visited." "Ah." Dolly leaned against the counter. "The one from Seattle? How did you know?" "Small town. Word gets around." She refilled Quinn's cup. "What did she say?" "That I'm wasting my time and money. That I'm being selfish." Dolly made a dismissive sound. "You know what I learned from being married twice and widowed twice? You can't live your life trying to make other people comfortable with your choices, especially when those choices aren't hurting anyone. She thinks I'm going to fail, that she and her sister will have to fix things. Will you? Fail, I mean." Quinn thought about it honestly. "I don't know. Maybe. But you're doing it anyway." "Yes." "Then that's all that matters." Dolly patted her hand. "People are uncomfortable with women who do things for themselves, especially women our age. We're supposed to be content with quiet lives, not making noise with power tools. Your daughter will either come around or she won't, but that's on her, not you." Quinn left the diner feeling steadier. She drove back to the property as the sun was setting, walked through the structure, and ran her hand along the new framing. Solid, true, real. That evening, Holly called. "Jamie called me. She's pretty upset." I know. She said you two fought. We disagreed. Holly was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, Mum, I think what you're doing is brave. I don't fully understand it, but I respect it. Thank you, and I'm sorry Jamie was harsh. She worries. She thinks I'm chasing ghosts. Maybe you are, but they're your ghosts to chase. Holly paused. Actually, I was thinking the kids have spring break in 2 weeks. What if we came out? They could see what you're building, help a little maybe. Something in Quinn's chest loosened. I'd like that. Great. I'll book flights. And Mum? Yes, I'm proud of you. After they hung up, Quinn sat on her porch and watched the stars emerge. The day had been difficult, but it had also clarified something. She couldn't make Jamie understand, and she was done trying. But Holly's support and Dolly's friendship and Griff's quiet assistance, those were enough. She wasn't alone in this after all. By early spring, the structure had walls and a partial roof. Quinn had worked through the worst of winter, bundling in layers and occasionally suspending work when the temperature dropped too low for adhesives to set properly. But she'd kept at it, and now the garage looked less like a ruin and more like something being born. The town's attitude had shifted in ways both subtle and obvious. People still slowed down to watch, but now some of them stopped to offer encouragement. The woman who ran the post office asked how the project was going. Wendell, at the hardware store, started setting aside materials he thought she might need, calling her when he got good deals on supplies. The teenage boy who'd helped her that first afternoon, his name was Kyle. She'd learned, came by most Saturdays now, eager to work and learn. Quinn found she didn't mind the company as much as she'd expected. Kyle was quiet and earnest, listened to her instructions, and asked thoughtful questions about technique. Teaching him reminded her of being 14 and working alongside her father, the satisfaction of skills being passed down. Then Vaughn Tomridge filed a complaint with the town council. The notice arrived certified mail. The language was formal and vague, citing concerns about property aesthetics and potential impact on surrounding property values. A public hearing was scheduled for the following week, and Quinn was required to attend to defend her project. She read the notice 3 times, feeling her anger rise with each reading. The garage was still under construction, obviously, but it was well maintained and clearly progressing. This was harassment, pure and simple, Vaughn making one more attempt to force her hand. Dolly, when Quinn told her, was less surprised. He's been talking around town, trying to build support. Says your property is becoming an eyesore. It's a construction site. I know that. Most people know that. But he's got some folks convinced you're going to abandon the project halfway through and leave it worse than you found it. I'm not abandoning anything. Then you'll need to prove that at the hearing. Show them what you've accomplished, what you're planning. Make them see this isn't just demolition, it's creation. The night before the hearing, Quinn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through what she'd say. She'd never been comfortable with public speaking, never liked being the center of attention. The thought of standing before the town council and defending herself made her stomach tight. But she'd come this far. She wasn't backing down now. The council meeting was held in the community center, a low building that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. When Quinn arrived 15 minutes early, the room was already half full. She recognized most of the faces, neighbors, business owners, people she'd known her entire life. Some offered encouraging nods, others looked away. Vaughn sat in the front row with a man in a suit who was probably his lawyer. He looked confident, relaxed, like this was merely an inconvenient formality before he got what he wanted. The council consisted of 5 members, all local business owners or retired professionals. The chair, Pauline Hendricks, was a woman in her 70s who'd run the town's only law office for 40 years before retiring. Quinn knew her slightly. Pauline had handled some paperwork when Tom died. Pauline called the meeting to order and explained the complaint. Vaughan's lawyer stood and made his case. The property was an ongoing nuisance, he said. Construction had dragged on for months with no clear end in sight. The unfinished structure was depressing property values in the area. The council should require Quinn to either complete the project within 60 days or return the property to its previous state. It was smoothly delivered and completely disingenuous. Quinn felt her hands clench in her lap. "Miss Stroud," Pauline said, "would you like to respond?" Quinn stood, her left knee protesting. She'd prepared notes but left them in her pocket. She spoke plainly, the way she'd always spoken. "I bought that property 4 months ago. It was a wreck half. Collapsed, full of trash, dangerous to anyone who went near it. I've spent those 4 months clearing it, stabilizing it, and rebuilding it according to the original design with modern improvements. I have all the proper permits. I've passed every inspection. The work is progressing exactly as planned." She paused, looking around the room. "This isn't an abandoned project. It's not an eyesore. It's not finished. There's a difference, and anyone who's driven by regularly can see the progress. Judge it when it's done, not while it's still being built." She sat down, her heart pounding. Griff Ashford stood. Quinn hadn't known he was there. "I've been helping Quinn with this project," he said in his gravelly voice. "I worked with Vernon Weatherby for 20 years. I know quality construction when I see it. And this is quality construction. Quinn's doing everything right, better than right. That building will stand for another 50 years when she's done. Anyone who's actually looked at the work instead of just driving by can see that." He sat down, then Dolly stood. "I've known Quinn Stroud since she was a girl," Dolly said. "She's the most stubborn, determined person I've ever met. When she says she's going to finish something, she finishes it. This complaint isn't about property values or aesthetics. It's about someone who wants that land, trying to pressure Quinn into selling. The council shouldn't be a tool for that kind of manipulation." One by one, others stood. The hardware store owner talked about how Quinn had bought every single material herself, paid in full, shown commitment to the project. Kyle, the teenage volunteer, talked about learning carpentry, about how Quinn had given him purpose on Saturday mornings. The postmaster mentioned that she'd seen the progress every week, watched the structure transform from ruin to something solid and real. Even people who'd been skeptical at first spoke up. The pattern was clear. This was someone working honestly toward a goal, and the town was choosing to support her rather than see her bullied. Vaughan's expression grew darker with each testimonial. Finally, Pauline called for a vote. The motion was to require Quinn to complete the project within 60 days or face penalties. "I vote no," Pauline said. "This town's forgotten what it means to build together. What we're seeing here is someone doing exactly that building. I won't penalize her for it." The other council members voted 4-3 in favor of Quinn. The motion was denied. The room applauded. Quinn sat very still, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and something that felt like vindication. Vaughan and his lawyer left immediately, not meeting anyone's eyes. People came up afterward to shake Quinn's hand, to offer congratulations and support. She accepted it all with awkward grace, unused to being the focus of approval rather than skepticism. Holly was there. Quinn hadn't seen her arrive, but there she was, with the kids, Emma, 8, and Jack, 6. They ran to Quinn, hugging her waist, chattering about the cool building Grandma was making. "When did you get here?" Quinn asked Holly. "This morning. I wasn't going to let you do this alone." Holly hugged her. "You were amazing, Mom." They drove to the property after the meeting, all of them crammed into Quinn's truck. Emma and Jack explored the structure with the fearless curiosity of children, climbing on beams and peering into corners. Holly walked the perimeter with Quinn, taking it all in. "This is really something," Holly said. "I mean it. This is incredible." Quinn showed them the beam with her father's carved initials, explained how the building had originally been constructed, pointed out the modifications she'd made. Her grandchildren listened with genuine interest, asking questions, touching the wood with careful hands. "What's it going to be when it's done?" Emma asked. Quinn paused. It was a question she'd been avoiding. But now, standing here with her family, the answer came clear. "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to have ideas." That evening, after Holly and the kids left for their hotel, Quinn sat alone in the structure as the sun set. The hearing had been exhausting, but it had also shown her something important. She wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. The town had chosen her side. They'd seen her work, recognized her commitment, and decided she was worth defending. She thought about what Emma had asked. What would it be when it was done? Not just a garage, something more. Something that gave back. The idea began to take shape. Quinn found the letter on a Saturday morning while searching for the original electrical schematic. She'd been going through the last of her father's papers, documents she'd stored away after his death, and never quite managed to sort through. The letter was tucked inside the folded blueprint, written in Vernon's careful handwriting on a piece of notebook paper. The date was the 10th of April, 2015. A week before he died. "Quinn," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone," which I suppose was inevitable. "I'm writing this because I never was good at saying things out loud, and there are things you should know. You've always been the strong one. Even as a girl, you had a kind of quiet steel in you that reminded me of your mother. After Tom died, I watched you rebuild your life piece by piece, raising those girls on your own, never complaining, never asking for help you didn't absolutely need. I was proud of you then. I'm proud of you now. But I worry that you've spent so much time being strong for everyone else that you've forgotten to be strong for yourself. To do something bold and yours, not because it serves someone else, but because it feeds your own soul. I built that garage with my own hands, and you helped me. I've always hoped that one day you'd build something too, something that's entirely yours, something that scares you a little, but makes you feel alive. Whatever that is, I hope you'll do it. Don't wait. Don't let the years pile up while you play it safe. You're capable of more than you know, and you're allowed to want things just for yourself. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I believe in you, always. Dad." Quinn read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. Then she sat on the tailgate of her truck and cried in a way she hadn't since her father's funeral, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she'd kept locked down for a decade. The letter felt like permission, like absolution, like a voice from the past telling her that what she was doing wasn't foolish or selfish, but exactly what she needed to do. She tucked the letter into her shirt pocket, close to her heart, and got back to work. The structure was 3/4 complete now. The roof was on, the walls were up, the windows were framed. What remained was interior work, electrical, insulation, finishing touches. Quinn had been working, alone mostly, with Griff stopping by once or twice a week to check her progress and offer guidance. But that afternoon, Griff arrived with company. 3 other men climbed out of trucks behind him, all retired carpenters or contractors Quinn recognized from her father's generation. They carried tools and purpose, and Griff introduced them with characteristic brevity. "This is Marcus, Dale, and Frank. We're bored. Figured we'd help." Quinn tried to protest, to explain she couldn't pay them, but Griff waved her off. "Your old man helped all of us at one point or another. We're just settling accounts." They worked together through the afternoon, and the progress was remarkable. What would have taken Quinn weeks took hours with experienced hands sharing the load. They installed the electrical panel, ran conduit, framed out the interior walls. The men worked with the easy coordination of people who'd spent their lives in construction, communicating in shorthand and shared understanding. At one point, Marcus, a quiet man with scarred hands, said, "Vernon taught me how to read a blueprint. I was 22, thought I knew everything. He spent 3 Saturdays showing me the math behind it, never once made me feel stupid for not knowing." Dale nodded. He lent me his truck for 2 months when mine died, and I couldn't afford another one. Never asked for gas money, never asked for it back until I could manage without it. The stories accumulated, painting a picture of her father, Quinn had known intellectually but never quite felt, a man who'd built community as carefully as he'd built structures, one act of generosity at a time. By the time they quit for the day, the structure had transformed. It looked less like a construction project and more like a building, something with walls and purpose and possibility. "We'll be back next weekend," Griff said as they packed up. "Get this finished right." The following week, word spread. Dolly organized what she called a work party for the upcoming Saturday. Quinn tried to dissuade her. This was her project, her thing, but Dolly was immovable. "People want to help," Dolly said firmly. "Let them." Saturday arrived clear and warm. Quinn showed up at 7, expecting maybe a dozen people. Instead, she found 30 men and women of all ages, carrying tools and supplies, ready to work. The hardware store had donated paint. The lumber yard had donated trim. People brought food and coolers full of drinks. Quinn stood at the edge of the property, overwhelmed, until Griff appeared at her elbow. "You're still in charge," he said quietly. "Just point people where they're needed." She did. She organized teams, assigned tasks, directed the work, and slowly the building took its final shape. The exterior was painted, the trim was installed, the interior walls were finished. By the end of the day, the structure was nearly complete. Just minor finishing work remained. The community celebrated their work with a potluck dinner spread across tailgates and folding tables. Quinn moved through the crowd, accepting thanks and congratulations, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. But not everyone was celebrating. Sunday morning, Quinn arrived at the property to find vandalism. Someone had thrown paint across the newly finished exterior walls, harsh red slashes that looked like wounds. Tools had been stolen from the locked storage container. A window had been smashed. She stood in the middle of the damage, shaking with anger and something like grief. After everything, after the progress and the community support, someone had tried to destroy it. Griff pulled up an hour later, took one look at the scene, and said, "Vaughn, you don't know that. I know enough." He walked the perimeter, assessing the damage. "He's desperate. That means you're winning. Doesn't feel like winning. It will when we fix this." By noon, word had spread again. People showed up with cleaning supplies and replacement materials. They scrubbed the paint off most of it, came away with mineral spirits and elbow grease, and replaced the broken window. The stolen tools were replaced within hours, people bringing extras from their own collections. Kyle, the teenager who'd been helping, brought his father a man Quinn vaguely recognized as the owner of a local construction company. "My son tells me you've been teaching him," the father said. "That means something. If you need anything, materials, labor, anything, you call me." By evening, the damage had been repaired. More than repaired, the structure looked better than it had before. The community's determination evident in every fixed detail. Quinn sat on her tailgate as people packed up, watching the sun set behind the completed building. Dolly came to stand beside her. "You're not alone in this," Dolly said simply. "I'm starting to see that. Vaughn thought he could bully you into giving up. Instead, he just showed everyone what you're made of, and what this town's made of, when it remembers." That night, Quinn drove home, exhausted but undefeated. She took her father's letter from her pocket and read it again in the quiet of her kitchen. "Do something bold and yours," he'd written. She was doing exactly that. And no amount of paint or broken glass would stop her now. The building was nearly finished. Just the final details remained: interior fixtures, final inspections, the sign she'd been planning. She'd found it in her father's workshop months ago. A hand-carved wooden sign reading V. Weatherby and Daughter that he'd made but never hung. She'd hang it herself, above the entrance, where everyone could see it. Her father had built the original structure. She'd rebuilt it. Together, across time, they'd made something that would last. The question now was, what would she do with it? The answer was forming, slowly but surely, like a structure rising from a foundation. Quinn was searching for the original property survey when she found the folder. She'd been going through her father's filing cabinet, one of those old metal things with sticky drawers that smelled like dust and old paper, looking for documentation she might need for the final building inspection. The survey would confirm property lines and easements, routine paperwork to close out the project. The folder was labeled in her father's careful handwriting, V.W. Property Holdings. She'd never seen it before. Quinn pulled it out, expecting tax records or old mortgage documents. Instead, she found a deed dated the 15th of March, 1975, 3 years before her father built the garage. The document showed that Vernon Weatherby had purchased 5 acres of land adjacent to the garage lot. 5 acres that had apparently never been developed, never been mentioned, seemingly forgotten by everyone, including Quinn herself. She read the deed 3 times, her mind trying to catch up with what she was seeing. The legal description placed the land directly behind and beside the garage property, a contiguous parcel that would have been valuable even in 1975. Her father had paid $8,000 for it, a substantial sum at the time. Quinn spread out her current property map beside the old deed. The 5 acres was still there, undeveloped, overgrown with scrub pine and wild grass. And according to the deed, they'd been part of her father's estate when he died, which meant legally they were now hers. She sat at her kitchen table with the documents spread before her, piecing together what this meant. Her father had owned not just the acre with the garage, but 5 additional acres that nobody seemed to know about. The title company that had cleared the garage property for sale must have missed this parcel, or perhaps the records had been filed in a way that separated them. But why would her father buy this land and then do nothing with it? Quinn pulled up the county assessor's website, old habits from her years working in that office, and searched for current ownership of the surrounding parcels. Most of the land in the area was owned by various individuals, small holdings typical of rural Montana. But one name appeared repeatedly: Tom Ridge Development, LLC. Vaughn owned 20 acres, directly adjacent to the 5 acres her father had purchased. Quinn felt something click into place. She pulled up the County Planning Commission records and found Vaughn's development proposal from 2 years ago, a luxury resort development called Mountain Ridge Estates. 50 high-end homes, a clubhouse, hiking trails. The proposal had been approved, but construction had never begun. She dug deeper into the public records and found the problem: access. Vaughn's 20 acres were landlocked, except for a narrow easement that didn't meet county requirements for the kind of development he wanted to build. To meet those requirements, he needed to either purchase additional access rights or acquire adjacent land that had better road frontage. The 5 acres her father had bought had that road frontage. Without those 5 acres, Vaughn's development couldn't proceed. With them, he could build his resort and likely make millions. This was why he'd wanted her small garage lot so badly. Not because he cared about 1 acre with a collapsing building, but because owning that acre would have given him leverage or revealed the 5 acres he actually needed. He'd probably researched the property records, found the old garage lot in probate limbo, and seen an opportunity. What he hadn't known was that Quinn had inherited not just the garage, but land he desperately needed and couldn't access without her. Her father must have understood this land's strategic value even back in 1975. He'd bought it quietly, built his garage on the adjoining acre, and never mentioned the larger parcel. Protection, perhaps, against future development, or an investment he'd planned to use someday. Quinn's hands shook slightly as she organized the documents. This changed everything. The harassment, the town council complaint, the vandalism, all of it took on new meaning. Vaughn hadn't been trying to force her to abandon a garage rebuild. He'd been trying to force her to sell land she hadn't even known she owned. She needed legal confirmation. The next morning, she drove to the county clerk's office and requested a complete title search on the 5-acre parcel. It took 3 hours, but the conclusion was unambiguous. The land was legally hers, clear title, no disputes, no liens. It had been included in her father's estate, and she'd inherited it along with everything else when he died. The clerk, a woman Quinn had worked with years ago, looked at her curiously. "You didn't know about this?" "Not until yesterday. That's a valuable piece of land. Got good road access, utilities nearby. Someone would pay well for it." Quinn thanked her and left with certified copies of the deed and title search. In her truck, she sat for a long moment, thinking about what came next. Vaughn would pay a fortune for this land, enough money to set her up for the rest of her life, to help her daughters, to ensure she'd never worry about finances again. Or she could keep it, do something else with it, something that honored her father's apparent intention to keep it out of the hands of developers. She drove out to the property, both properties now, she supposed, and walked the 5 acres for the first time with new eyes. The land rolled gently, dotted with mature pines, with a seasonal creek running through the eastern portion. It was beautiful, in an understated way, the kind of land that deserved something better than luxury homes for wealthy out-of-staters. Standing at the highest point, she could see the completed garage below. The building her father had designed, that she'd rebuilt, that the community had helped finish, a structure that represented not just construction, but transformation. An idea began to form. That evening, Vaughn Tomridge appeared at her door. He was different than he'd been at their previous encounters, less polished, more direct. "Miss Stroud, I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "I think you know." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've discovered the additional acreage." So he knew. Of course he knew. He'd probably been monitoring the county records, waiting for her to figure it out. "I have." "Then you understand why I've been so interested in your property. The garage lot was never the real issue. It's the 5 acres I need. Need for your resort development." "Exactly. Without that land, my project can't move forward. With it, I can build something that brings jobs and revenue to this area." Quinn leaned against her doorframe. "And makes you a substantial profit. That's how business works." He pulled out his phone, showed her a number. "This is what I'm prepared to offer for those 5 acres. It's more than fair, it's generous." The number had a lot of zeros, enough to change her life in measurable ways. Holly's kids' college funds, a new roof for her house, comfortable retirement, security. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long. I have other options, other properties I could pursue. But this would be cleaner for everyone." After he left, Quinn called Holly. Her daughter answered on the second ring, and Quinn explained everything, the hidden deed, Vaughn's offer, the choice she faced. Holly was quiet for a long moment. "Mum, that's life-changing money." "I know. You could help us with the kids' education. You could travel, fix up your house, hire help with the property. You'd be set. I know that too. But you're not sure." "I'm not sure," Holly sighed. "What does your gut say?" Quinn looked out her kitchen window at the Montana darkness. "My gut says that land stayed hidden for 40 years, for a reason. That my father knew exactly what he was doing when he bought it and never developed it. So you're thinking of keeping it?" "I'm thinking of doing something with it. Something different." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but not a resort. Not luxury homes for people who'll use them 3 weeks a year. Jamie's going to think you've completely lost your mind." "Jamie already thinks that," Holly laughed softly. "Fair point. Well, whatever you decide, I support you. But Mom, don't make this decision based on what you think Dad or Grandpa would want. Make it based on what you want." After they hung up, Quinn sat with that thought. What did she want? The money would solve problems, eliminate worry, provide security, but the land represented something else, possibility, legacy. the chance to create something that mattered beyond her own comfort. She thought about the community that had rallied around her garage rebuild, the people who'd shown up to help, who'd defended her at the town council meeting, who'd repaired the vandalism. She thought about Kyle learning carpentry on Saturday mornings. She thought about Griff and his crew passing down skills and stories. She thought about what her father had written, "Do something bold and yours." By morning, her decision was made. She wasn't selling, and she had a plan for what to build instead. Quinn spent a sleepless night mapping out her vision. The garage would become a community workshop free for locals to use, equipped with tools and workspace for anyone who wanted to build, create, or repair. The 5 acres would be developed as community gardens, a farmer's market space, and a gathering area. Not commercial development, but communal development. A place that gave back instead of taking. It would require grants, donations, maybe a small business loan. She'd need to establish it as a non-profit, recruit a board, create bylaws. The logistics were daunting, but not impossible. She'd spent 22 years processing paperwork at the county assessor's office. She knew how bureaucracy worked. More importantly, she believed in it. This felt right in a way that selling to Vaughn never could. She wore her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, had worn it since her mother died 15 years ago. The ring was simple gold, worn thin from decades of wear, and Quinn touched it now as she reviewed her notes. Her mother had been a teacher, someone who believed in investing in people rather than accumulating things. This project would honor that legacy alongside her father's. Morning came, and Quinn was already dressed and drinking coffee when the sun rose. She drove to the garage property and walked it slowly, touching the walls she'd built, running her hand along the beam with her father's carved initials. Then she walked the 5 acres, marking out in her mind where the gardens could go, where the market space would work best, where people could gather. Griff arrived around 8, as he often did on weekdays now. He took one look at her face and said, "You've made a decision." "I have." "About the land?" "Yes." "You're not selling to Tomridge?" "No, I'm not." He nodded slowly. "Good. What are you going to do instead?" She told him. "The workshop, the gardens, the community space." He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That's a big undertaking," he said finally. "I know. You'll need help, organization, people willing to serve on a board, volunteers to manage the space. I know that too." "Well then," he extended his hand. "Count me in. I'll help however I can." She shook his hand, grateful beyond words. "Thank you. When are you going to announce this?" "There's a town council meeting next week. I'll propose it formally then." Over the next few days, Quinn worked on her presentation. She drafted a proposal outlining the vision, the economic impact, the community benefit. She researched similar projects in other rural communities and found success stories that bolstered her case. She prepared financial projections, grant possibilities, and operational frameworks. Dolly, when Quinn told her, started crying. This is exactly what this town needs. People working together instead of being sold off piece by piece to developers. "I haven't convinced the council yet. You will, and I'll make sure everyone I know shows up to support you." Kyle's father, true to his word, offered to donate materials for the garden plots. The hardware store owner pledged supplies. Word spread through the community, and Quinn found herself fielding calls from people wanting to help, wanting to participate. But not everyone was supportive. Jamie called 3 days before the council meeting. Holly had told her about Quinn's decision, and Jamie was livid. "You're turning down millions of dollars," Jamie said without preamble. "Actual millions, Mom. To do what? Build some community garden. A community workshop and gathering space. That's insane. That's our inheritance you're throwing away." "Mine and Holly's." Quinn felt her patience thin. "Jamie, this is my property, my decision, not your inheritance. Everything you own is our inheritance. That's how it works. Not while I'm alive, it isn't. And maybe not after, depending on what I decide to do with this land. Silence. Then Jamie's voice, cold and tight. You're being incredibly selfish. Maybe, or maybe I'm finally being myself. What's that supposed to mean? Quinn took a breath, choosing her words carefully. It means I've spent 33 years being careful and responsible and doing what everyone expected. I've raised you and your sister, worked a steady job, never made waves, and now I have a chance to build something that matters, something that helps people, and you're calling me selfish because it doesn't benefit you financially. That's not fair, isn't it? You want me to sell this land so you can inherit money you haven't earned. I want to use it to create something that serves this community. Which one of us is actually being selfish? I can't believe you're saying this. I'm sorry you feel that way, but my decision is made. Jamie hung up. Quinn sat in the silence of her kitchen and felt the pain of the breach between them, but she didn't regret her words. Sometimes honesty hurt, but it was necessary. Holly called an hour later. Jamie called me. She's really upset. I know. She thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. What do you think? Holly was quiet for a moment. I think you're doing something brave and a little bit crazy, and I'm proud of you. The money would have been nice, sure, but I'd rather have a mother who's happy and building something meaningful than a mother who's comfortable and miserable. Thank you. Though I do hope you know what you're getting into. Running a non-profit is a lot of work. So is rebuilding a garage. I managed that. You did. You really did. The town council meeting arrived. The community centre was packed, more people than Quinn had ever seen at a council meeting. Supporters filled the seats, including Griff and his crew, Dolly, Kyle and his father, the hardware store owner, the postmaster, and dozens of others. Vaughn was there too, in the front row with his lawyer, looking confident but wary. Pauline called the meeting to order and gave Quinn the floor. Quinn stood, her notes in hand, and began her presentation. She explained the hidden land deed, her decision to keep the property, and her vision for what it could become. This land has been protected for 40 years, she said. My father bought it and never developed it, and I believe there was purpose in that. Not everything needs to be converted into profit. Sometimes land serves better by serving people. She outlined the workshop plan, the community gardens, the farmers, market space. She showed the financial projections, the grant opportunities, the letters of support she'd already received. She emphasized the economic impact, increased foot traffic for local businesses, opportunities for local craftspeople and farmers, educational programs for young people. This isn't about stopping development, she said. It's about choosing the kind of development that strengthens community rather than displaces it. Vaughn's lawyer stood to object. He talked about liability concerns, zoning complications, traffic impact. But his arguments felt thin, grasping. The council had already seen Quinn work through bureaucratic challenges with the garage rebuild. They knew she was thorough and determined. Then Vaughn himself stood. The council needs to consider what's best for the town's economy. My development would bring jobs, revenue, growth. Miss Stroud is offering what? A free workshop and some garden plots? That's not economic development. That's charity. Griff stood before Quinn could respond. Vaughn's development would bring temporary construction jobs and homes for wealthy people who don't live here. Quinn's project will serve the people who do live here, who raise families here, who build the actual community. There's a difference. One by one, community members stood to speak. A young mother talked about needing affordable space to start a pottery business. An older man talked about wanting to teach woodworking classes to teenagers. Kyle talked about learning skills that would serve him his entire life. Dolly talked about community gathering spaces and how the town had lost too many already. Even some people who'd been initially skeptical spoke in favor. The pattern was clear. This project had captured something the community needed, a way to preserve and strengthen rather than simply monetize. Vaughn made a final play. "I'll donate $50,000 to the town if the council rejects this proposal. Fund whatever projects you want. But don't let sentiment block real progress." The room went quiet. $50,000 was significant money for a town the size of Shepherd's Bend. Pauline looked at Vaughn, then at Quinn, then around the packed room. "Mr. Tomridge, your offer is noted. But this council's job is to serve the people who live here, not the developers who want to profit from them. Miss Stroud has shown more commitment to this community in the past 6 months than most people show in a lifetime. She's earned the right to pursue her vision." She called for a vote. The motion was to approve Quinn's proposal and grant preliminary zoning clearance for the community workshop and garden space project. "I vote yes," Pauline said. One by one, the other council members voted, 4-3, in favor of Quinn. The room erupted in applause. Vaughn stood, his face dark with anger, and left without a word. His lawyer followed. People surrounded Quinn, shaking her hand, offering congratulations and promises of support. She accepted it all, overwhelmed and grateful and slightly dizzy with relief and excitement. This was really happening. She was really doing this. Holly was there with the kids. Emma hugged Quinn's waist. "Grandma, can I have a garden plot?" "Of course you can. And can Grandpa come see it?" Quinn's throat tightened. "He already has, sweetheart. He already has." That night, driving home alone, Quinn thought about everything that had led to this moment. The collapse of the garage, the decision to rebuild, the community that had formed around her work, the discovery of the hidden land, the choice to create rather than sell. She'd started this journey thinking she was just rebuilding her father's garage. But she'd been rebuilding herself too, into someone brave enough to claim her own vision, strong enough to defend it, and stubborn enough to see it through, regardless of opposition. The real work was about to begin. But she was ready. She touched her mother's ring at her throat and smiled. 2 weeks after the council vote, Quinn stood before the completed Weatherby Community Workshop holding a golden nail. Griff had presented it to her that morning, a carpenter's tradition for the final nail in a completed project. The nail was actually brass, polished to a shine, with her initials engraved on the head. "Every building needs a ceremonial last nail," he'd said. "Your father would have done this if he'd been here. But he wasn't here, and that was both painful and right." This was Quinn's project now, her vision made real. Her father had started it 47 years ago with a simple garage. She'd transformed it into something more. The grand opening was scheduled for noon. It was a Saturday in early May, warm enough that people weren't wearing jackets, but cool enough that the Montana sun felt pleasant rather than oppressive. Quinn had been at the site since dawn, making final preparations, arranging tools on the pegboards, sweeping floors that were already clean, fussing with details because she was nervous. The workshop looked exactly as she'd envisioned. The exterior had been painted barn red with white trim, a nod to traditional Montana building aesthetics. The V, Weatherby and Daughter sign hung above the main entrance, the letters carved deep and clear. Inside, workbenches lined the walls, equipped with her father's restored tools, alongside new ones donated by the community. A pottery wheel occupied one corner. A small woodshop filled another. Safety equipment hung on clearly labeled hooks. A bulletin board displayed sign-up sheets for workshops and classes people had already volunteered to teach. The 5 acres beyond the workshop were taking shape too. Garden plots had been staked out, numbered, and assigned. The first farmers' market was scheduled for the following weekend. A simple pavilion, built by Griff and his crew, provided shelter for gatherings. The seasonal creek had been cleared of debris and now flowed clear through the property. People began arriving around 11. Quinn watched them come, families, individuals, old friends, and new allies. Dolly showed up with enough food to feed an army, organizing it on tables in the pavilion. Kyle arrived with his father and younger sister, all of them carrying plants to donate to the community garden. The hardware store owner brought a ceremonial set of keys for Quinn, though the workshop would never actually be locked during operating hours. Holly and the kids arrived just before noon, and Emma ran to Quinn with a hand-drawn picture she'd made, the workshop surrounded by flowers and sunshine. "For your office, Grandma, it's perfect." "Thank you." Quinn hugged her granddaughter, feeling grateful beyond measure that at least one branch of her family could celebrate this with her. Jamie hadn't come. Quinn hadn't expected her to, but the absence still ached. Maybe someday her older daughter would understand. Maybe not. Quinn was learning to accept that some relationships were more complicated than love could easily fix. At noon, Pauline Hendricks arrived, wearing her official capacity as former town attorney and current council chair. She'd agreed to say a few words before Quinn's speech, and she took her place beside the workshop entrance with natural authority. "This town's forgotten how to build together," Pauline began, her voice carrying clearly in the spring air. "We've gotten comfortable with the idea that development means selling to the highest bidder, that progress means bringing in outsiders with money. Quinn Stroud reminded us, there's another way." She took a collapsed building nobody wanted and turned it into something that serves everyone. "That's not just construction, that's community." People applauded. Quinn felt her throat tighten with emotion. "So today," Pauline continued, "we're not just opening a workshop, we're reclaiming the idea that we can build our own future on our own terms, for our own benefit. That's worth celebrating." She stepped aside, and Quinn took her place. She'd prepared a speech, written and revised it a dozen times, but now, standing before all these people who'd supported and helped her, the prepared words felt wrong. She spoke from her heart instead. "6 months ago, I bought a garage everyone said was beyond saving. People thought I was foolish. Maybe I was. But I couldn't let it be destroyed. My father built that garage with his own hands, and I helped him. I was 14, learning how to measure and cut and trust the level. Those summers working with him were some of the happiest of my life." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "After my father died, I forgot that happiness. I forgot what it felt like to build something, to create instead of just maintain. This project reminded me. And it showed me something else that I wasn't building alone. This community showed up. You defended me when I was challenged. You helped when the work got too big. You believed in something better than what we were offered." She pulled the golden nail from her pocket. In carpentry, the last nail is ceremonial. It represents completion, but also continuation. A building is finished, so it can begin serving its purpose. This workshop is finished now. What it becomes, what we make of it together, that's just starting. Griff handed her a hammer. Quinn walked to the main beam, the one that still bore her father's carved initials, and positioned the golden nail just below them. The crowd fell silent. She drove the nail home with 3 solid strikes. The sound echoed across the property, final and sure. "The Weatherby Community Workshop is open," she said. The applause was thunderous. People surged forward to explore, to touch the tools, to see the space they'd helped create. Children ran through the garden plots. Adults examined the workshop equipment with interest and approval. Conversations bloomed about classes and projects and possibilities. Quinn stood at the center of it all, watching her vision become lived reality, and felt complete in a way she'd never expected. This was what her father had meant. Do something bold and yours. She'd done it, and it was just beginning. The celebration lasted all afternoon. People explored the workshop with the tentative curiosity of those entering a space that might actually be theirs. A young mother asked about the pottery wheel, and Quinn showed her how to sign up for time slots. An older man wanted to teach basic home repair classes, and Quinn added his name to the volunteer instructor list. Kyle asked if he could organize a youth woodworking group, and Quinn said yes immediately. Ideas bloomed faster than Quinn could track them. A woman wanted to start a quilting circle. A veteran asked about using the space for therapeutic woodworking sessions. A teacher requested permission to bring her high school shop class for supplemental instruction. Each request came with energy, with the sense that people had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Dolly found Quinn in the middle of the crowd and pulled her aside. "You need to see something." She led Quinn outside to the garden plots. People had already started planting, not just in their assigned spaces, but helping each other, sharing seeds and advice, working together. Children dug in the dirt while parents marked rows. Neighbors who Quinn knew had barely spoken in years worked side by side, united by shared purpose. "This is what you built," Dolly said quietly. "Not just a building, a reason for people to connect." Quinn watched a grandmother teaching her grandson how to plant tomato starts and felt tears prick her eyes. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, but seeing it actualized was overwhelming in the best way. The newspaper had sent a reporter and photographer. The reporter, a young woman named Tessa, approached Quinn with notebook in hand. "Can I ask you a few questions?" "Of course. What made you decide to do this instead of selling to Vaughan Tomridge?" Quinn considered the question carefully. "Because not everything valuable can be measured in dollars. This land, this building, they're worth more as community assets than as private profit. Some people are calling this a rejection of development. It's not a rejection of development. It's a choice about what kind of development serves us best. Luxury homes for part-time residents or spaces that support the people who live here year-round. I chose the latter. And the financial aspect? You turned down a substantial offer." "I did. And I'd do it again." Quinn looked around at the people filling her property, using her space, building community. "Money can provide comfort, but it can't create meaning. This," she gestured at the scene around them, "this creates meaning." Tessa scribbled notes, then looked up with a smile. "That's a good quote. Mind if I take your picture in front of the building?" Quinn stood beside the workshop entrance, under the sign bearing her father's name and hers, and let herself be photographed. Holly captured the moment too, on her phone, and later she'd tell Quinn, "You look different. Younger, somehow." Quinn knew what she meant. She felt different. Stronger, more herself than she'd been in decades. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Griff appeared with his crew, Marcus, Dale, and Frank. They'd brought steaks and a portable grill, and they set up in the pavilion to feed whoever was still around. The impromptu cookout drew people back from exploring, and soon the pavilion was full of folks eating and talking and laughing. Quinn found herself at a table with Griff and Dolly, watching the crowd. "Thank you," she said to them both. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," Griff said. "Would have just taken longer. And been lonelier," Dolly added. "We were happy to help." "Still, thank you." Marcus raised his beer bottle. "To Vernon Weatherby's daughter, who's even more stubborn than he was." They toasted, and Quinn felt her father's presence in that moment, not as grief or absence, but as foundation. He'd taught her to build. She'd taken that lesson and created something he'd be proud of. As the sun set, people began to drift home. Holly gathered the kids, who were tired and dirty and completely happy. "We'll come back next month," she promised Quinn. "Emma wants her garden plot. It'll be waiting." After most people had gone, Quinn walked the property alone. The workshop stood solid and complete, light from the interior spilling out through the windows. The garden plots waited for their crops. The pavilion sat ready for gatherings. Everything was finished. Ready, possible. She'd started this journey 6 months ago, standing before a collapsed garage, making a choice that seemed foolish to everyone watching. She'd rebuilt the structure. She'd fought off a determined developer. She'd navigated bureaucracy and family conflict. She'd discovered hidden land and turned down life-changing money. She'd created something from nothing, transformed ruin into renewal. And now, standing in the twilight of opening day, Quinn Stroud, 61, widowed, overlooked and written off, felt victorious. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the workshop, the sign lit by the setting sun. Then she sent it to Jamie with a simple message. "It's done, and it's good. I hope someday you'll come see it." No response came, but Quinn hadn't expected one. Some bridges took time to rebuild. She locked nothing. The workshop would remain open and available, and drove home as darkness settled over Montana. Tomorrow she'd be back to start managing the space, organizing the volunteers, implementing the programs people had proposed. But tonight, she let herself feel complete. She'd chosen herself, and everyone could see what that choice had built. 3 months passed like water, finding its course steady, inevitable, shaping everything it touched. The Weatherby Community Workshop became the heart of Shepherd's Bend in ways Quinn hadn't fully anticipated. On any given day, you'd find someone at the workbenches building furniture, repairing tools, creating art. The pottery wheel was booked solid for weeks. The woodworking classes Kyle organized filled immediately and spawned a waiting list. The Veterans Therapeutic Woodworking Group met every Tuesday evening, and the quiet concentration in those sessions felt almost sacred. The farmers' market happened every Saturday, rain or shine. Local farmers and craftspeople set up under the pavilion, selling produce and honey and handmade goods. People came not just to shop, but to linger, to talk, to be part of something. The market became a gathering place, the kind of organic community center that couldn't be manufactured, but had to grow naturally from genuine need and willing participation. The garden plots flourished. Emma's tomatoes were already showing fruit. An elderly couple who'd been growing vegetables for 50 years shared their expertise with young families just learning. The seasonal creek that ran through the property became a favorite spot for children, and someone had built a small bridge across it using scraps from the workshop. Quinn managed it all, with help from a rotating crew of volunteers. Griff served on the newly formed non-profit board, along with Dolly, Pauline, and 3 other community members. They met monthly to discuss operations, review finances, and plan expansions. The structure was solid, sustainable, designed to outlast any single person's involvement. Economically, the impact was measurable. The local businesses reported increased foot traffic. Property values in the area had actually risen not because of luxury development, but because the community had become more desirable, more connected, more alive. Tom Ridge had eventually sold his 20 acres to a conservation trust and moved on to developments elsewhere. The land would remain undeveloped, protected in perpetuity. Quinn taught a basic carpentry class on Saturday mornings. Her students ranged from teenagers to retirees, all learning the fundamentals her father had taught her decades ago. How to read a level, how to measure twice and cut once, how to trust the mathematics of construction. She used her father's tools for demonstrations, the hand plane, the carpenter's square, the old wooden mallet, and told stories about him as she taught. The students learned carpentry, but they also learned about legacy, about skill passed down through generations, about the satisfaction of making something with your own hands. Holly visited monthly, always bringing the kids. Emma had become serious about gardening, keeping a careful journal of what she planted and how it grew. Jack had discovered he liked woodworking, and Quinn was teaching him the basics. During their visits, Holly often stayed to help in the workshop, and she'd confided to Quinn that she was considering a career change, maybe teaching, maybe something with her hands instead of behind a computer. Jamie hadn't visited, but she'd called twice, conversations that were brief and careful, testing the waters of reconciliation. She'd seen the newspaper article about the workshop, she'd said. It looked nice. Quinn had accepted the olive branch for what it was, a beginning, not an ending. Some relationships took time to rebuild, required patience and forgiveness on both sides. She and Jamie would get there, or they wouldn't. Quinn had made her peace with both possibilities. Her own life had transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. She was stronger physically. The constant work had rebuilt muscle and stamina. Her limp was still there, but less pronounced. She slept better. woke with purpose, moved through her days with energy she hadn't felt in years. She'd started dating someone, a quiet man named Robert, who taught history at the high school and appreciated her straightforward manner. Nothing serious yet, just company and conversation and the pleasant surprise of attraction at an age when she'd assumed that part of life was finished. But more than the physical changes, Quinn felt different internally. The woman who'd stood before a collapsed garage 6 months ago, invisible and overlooked, had become someone visible, someone whose vision had transformed her community. She'd learned that it was never too late to become bold, to claim space, to build something meaningful. One evening in late summer, Quinn sat alone in the workshop after everyone had gone home. The space was quiet but full of tools, full of projects in progress, full of possibility. She walked to the main beam and ran her hand over the carved initials V, W, and Q, W, side by side. The golden nail gleamed just below them. A new photograph sat on the mise, the small desk she'd set up in the corner. Holly had taken it on opening day, Quinn standing in front of the completed workshop, the sign visible above her. The photo mirrored the old one of her father in almost eerie detail. Same building, different generation, same determination visible in the eyes. She thought about her father's letter, the one she kept folded in her wallet now. "Do something bold and yours," he'd written. She'd done that. She'd bought a ruined garage nobody wanted and turned it into something the whole community needed. She'd refused easy money to build hard meaning. She'd chosen herself and, in doing so, had given others the space to choose themselves too. Tomorrow she'd be back, teaching her class, managing the space, helping people create. The day after that, and the day after that, because this wasn't a project with an endpoint. It was a living thing that required tending, that would grow and change and continue long after she was gone. But tonight, she just sat with the satisfaction of completion. Not the completion of construction that had happened months ago, but the completion of transformation. She'd rebuilt more than a garage. She'd rebuilt herself, piece by piece, nail by nail, choice by choice. Quinn Stroud had learned what her father had tried to tell her, that it's never too late to build something meaningful. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That legacy isn't about what you inherit, but what you create and pass forward. She locked the door, they'd started locking it at night after all, just for security, and walked to her truck. The Montana sky was full of stars, vast and clear. She drove home slowly, windows down, radio playing low, and felt grateful for every decision that had led her here. Some things are worth building, no matter how late you start. She'd built something beautiful, and it would stand for generations.